courtroom is supposed to be a place of order of facts and figures. But on that crisp autumn afternoon, the air in Department 12 crackled with something far more volatile, pure, unadulterated human drama. Every eye was fixed on Brennan Whittaker, the tech mogul whose net worth was discussed in the same hushed tones as a Hollywood blockbuster's opening weekend. He was leaving the witness stand, a smirk etched onto his handsome face. It was a look of absolute victory of a man who had just outplayed everyone. And then his pregnant wife Elara played the audio. A hidden recording that would not just shatter his smirk, but his entire carefully constructed empire. This is the story of how a woman pushed to the edge found a strength she never knew she had, and how a millionaire husband learned that some secrets have a price tag no amount of money can cover. The penthouse was a testament to a life lived above the fray. Spanning the top 2 floors of one of the city's most prestigious buildings, it offered a panoramic view of the skyline, a glittering tapestry of a world that Brennan Whittaker felt he owned. And in many ways he did. Brennan was the founder and CEO of Innovate, a tech firm that had revolutionized data security. He was sharp-driven and possessed a charisma that could disarm even the most hardened skeptics. He was the man who had everything. And his most prized possession, he often declared at lavish charity galas, was his wife Elara. To the outside world, Elara Whittaker was as perfect as the life she lived. She was elegant, intelligent, and carried the serene glow of a woman who was wanted, cherished. Now 7 months pregnant with their first child, she seemed to be the final perfect piece in Brennan's masterpiece of a life. She had met him 5 years prior, a whirlwind romance that saw her swept from her quiet life as a librarian into a world of private jets, couture gowns, and breathless headlines. She loved him deeply and truly. She believed in the fairy tale because for a long time it was real. The first crack in the gilded cage appeared not with a bang, but with the soft metallic click of a key. It was a Tuesday night. Brennan had come home late, smelling of expensive whiskey in the cold night air. As Elara helped him off with his custom-tailored coat, her fingers brushed against something small and hard in the inner pocket. It was a single key, ornate and unfamiliar. It didn't belong to their home, their cars, or their country estate. "What's this, my love?" she asked, holding it up. Brennan's eyes flickered to the key, and for a fraction of a second a shadow passed over his features. It was so fleeting she almost missed it. He chuckled a smooth, practiced sound and took the key from her. "Ah, that. It's for a new storage unit for the office. Old file servers, that sort of boring stuff. I forgot it was in there." He kissed her forehead, his lips cool against her skin. "You worry too much. How are my 2 favorite people doing today?" He placed a hand on her swollen belly, his smile returning as bright and reassuring as the morning sun. But the explanation felt thin, too quick. Brennan was a man who delegated everything. He hadn't handled old files in years. The seed of doubt, small and unwelcome, was planted. In the weeks that followed, the seed began to sprout, nurtured by a growing list of inconsistencies. There were the phone calls he started taking on the terrace, his voice a low, urgent murmur carried away by the wind. There were the late nights at the office that became more frequent, yet when she once called the office landline after midnight, the cleaning crew answered, confirming the entire floor was empty. He'd come home looking not tired from work, but energized, a strange foreign scent clinging to his clothes, not a woman's perfume, but something floral and expensive like the air in a high-end boutique. Then came the watch. A Patek Philippe, its face a brilliant blue, appeared on his wrist one morning. "A client gift," he'd said, preening as he adjusted the strap. They were thrilled with the last quarter's performance. But Elara, who managed their personal finances and saw every statement, knew their biggest client was a stoic, no-frills logistics company. They weren't the type for $100,000 thank-you gifts. The lie was so blatant, so lazy, it was almost insulting. The unease curdled into a constant, sickening hum in the pit of her stomach. She felt like a stranger in her own home, an actress in the play of her own life. The man she loved was becoming a phantom. his true self receding, replaced by a charming, smiling stranger who held her hand and lied to her face. Her breaking point came on a rainy Thursday. Brennan called to say he was stuck in back-to-back meetings and wouldn't be home until after midnight. An hour later, her friend Fiona called, bubbling with excitement from a charity auction she'd just left. "You'll never guess who I saw leaving just as I arrived," Fiona had gushed. "Brennan!" He was getting into a cab. I shouted to him, but I don't think he heard me over the rain. He looked like he was in a real hurry. The auction was on the other side of town from Brennan's office. There were no meetings there. The lie, so simple and so clear, was the final push she needed. The image of him rushing through the rain, not to a meeting, but somewhere else, somewhere secret, solidified her resolve. The fairy tale was over. It was time to find out what was real. That night, after Brennan had slipped into bed beside her, feigning sleep, Elara crept out of their room. Her hands trembled as she retrieved the coat he had worn earlier. The key was still there. She pressed it into a bar of soap, making a perfect impression. The next morning, she contacted a private investigator. He was a former detective named Miles Corbin, a man with tired eyes and a reputation for quiet, ruthless efficiency. She met him in a discreet coffee shop, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. "My husband," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "I think he has another life." She gave him the soap impression and a photograph of Brennan. She told him about the late nights, the lies, the watch. Corbin listened patiently, his expression unreadable. "The key is the place to start," he said, his voice a gravelly baritone. "It's usually the thread that unravels the whole sweater." The wait was agonizing. For 3 days, Elara went through the motions of her life. She attended her prenatal yoga class, she met friends for lunch, she smiled and reassured Brennan that she was fine, just tired from the pregnancy. But inside she was a wreck. Every ping of her phone sent a jolt of anxiety through her. On the 4th day, Corbin called. "I found it," he said, his tone all business. "The key belongs to a private residence, a penthouse apartment in the Orpheus building downtown." The Orpheus. It was a new, obscenely luxurious development known for its discretion and security. It was the kind of place where people went when they didn't want to be found. "The lease is under a corporate name," Corbin continued, "a shell company, but I traced its ownership." He paused. "It's owned by your husband, Mrs. Whittaker. He's the sole tenant." Elara sank onto a nearby bench, the phone feeling heavy as a stone in her hand. The city blurred around her. A secret apartment. The confirmation was a cold, hard slap in the face. But Corbin wasn't finished. "There's more," he said, his voice softening slightly as if bracing her for the final blow. "I've had surveillance on the building for the past 24 hours. He's not living there alone. He's been seen multiple times with a woman." Elara closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a hot path down her cheek. "Who is she?" "Her name is Nicolette Devereaux. She owns an art gallery in the gallery district. I'm sending you the photos now." Her phone vibrated. With trembling fingers, she opened the message. The pictures were grainy, taken from a distance, but there was no mistaking the figures. There was Brennan, her husband, laughing as he unlocked the door to the secret apartment. And beside him, her hand tucked possessively in the crook of his arm, was a woman. She was stunning tall, with a cascade of fiery red hair and a sharp, sophisticated style that made her look both creative and dangerous. Nicolette Devereaux. In one photo, Brennan leaned in and kissed her, a deep, passionate kiss filled with a familiarity that shattered Elara's heart into a million pieces. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a fling. This was a life. A whole separate life built on a foundation of lies paid for with their money in an apartment across town. The gilded cage had swung open, and outside she saw not freedom, but a truth more horrifying than she could have ever imagined. The photographs were a brand on her soul. Elara stared at them for what felt like hours. The images of Brennan and Nicolette seared into her mind. The easy intimacy, the shared laughter, the proprietary way Nicolette held his arm. It all spoke of a history Elara was never meant to know. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest that made it hard to breathe. The man she had built her life with, the man whose child she was carrying, was a stranger. That evening, the stranger came home. Brennan walked in all smiles and charm, holding a bouquet of Elara's favorite white peonies. "For my beautiful wife," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I closed the Henderson deal today. We're celebrating." Elara looked at him, at the handsome face she once adored, and felt a chilling wave of revulsion. The flowers, the smile, the feigned celebration, it was all part of the performance. She took a deep breath, the scent of the peonies suddenly cloying, and laid the surveillance photos on the marble countertop. "Who is she, Brennan?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Brennan's smile froze. He looked down at the pictures, his face instantly paling. The mask of the devoted husband slipped, revealing the cornered animal beneath. For a moment he was speechless. Then the training of a lifetime of manipulation kicked in. He looked up, his expression shifting from shock to a carefully crafted look of wounded indignation. "Elara, what is this? Are you having me followed? After everything we have, you'd stoop to this. Answer the question." "It's not what it looks like," he said, his voice rising. "She's a business associate. That apartment is a corporate suite for entertaining international clients. You've twisted this into something sordid." The gaslighting was so audacious, so complete, it almost took her breath away. He was trying to make her the villain. "A corporate suite? You kissed your business associate, Brennan. You hold her like you used to hold me. Don't you dare lie to me. Not anymore." Tears streamed down her face, hot and angry. She wanted him to confess, to show a flicker of remorse, to give her something, anything to salvage from the wreckage. Instead, he doubled down. He softened his tone, his eyes welling with manufactured tears. He came towards her, his hands outstretched. "Baby, listen to me. Your hormones are all over the place with the pregnancy. You're not thinking clearly. You're paranoid. This woman, Nicolette, she's a friend. She was having a hard time, and I was offering her comfort. It was a moment of weakness, a stupid, meaningless mistake. A single kiss. It meant nothing. You and this baby are my entire world. You have to believe me." He was so convincing. His voice was laced with a desperate sincerity that made her for a split second want to believe him. She saw the man she fell in love with, the man who could charm anyone. But then she looked at the photos again, at the kiss that was anything but meaningless, and the cold, hard truth solidified in her heart. He wasn't just lying. He was trying to break her, to make her doubt her own sanity. She pushed his hands away. "Get out," she whispered. "What? Get out of my house, Brennan." His face hardened. The faux remorse vanished, replaced by a flash of cold fury. "Your house. Don't be ridiculous, Elara. This is my house. You're being hysterical. We'll talk about this when you've calmed down." He turned and walked towards his study, closing the door with a decisive click, leaving her alone with the damning photos and the ruins of her marriage. The confrontation had been a disaster. He had twisted her pain into paranoia, her evidence into hysteria. He had made it clear that he would not go down without a fight, and that he would use any means necessary to win. The next day, her investigator, Miles Corbin, called with more information. His findings went far beyond a simple affair. "It's not just a love nest, Mrs. Whittaker," Corbin said, his voice grim. "It's a business operation. I dug into the financials of Nicolette Devereaux's gallery. It was failing a year ago, on the brink of bankruptcy. Then suddenly it received a massive infusion of capital, $500,000. Elara felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. "Let me guess where it came from." "The money was funneled from one of your husband's subsidiary companies," Corbin confirmed. "It was disguised as a series of art investments. He hasn't just been cheating on you, Mrs. Whittaker. He's been using your joint assets to fund his mistress's lifestyle and career." The betrayal was deeper and more calculated than she could have imagined. It wasn't just about sex. It was about their life, their money, their future. He was stealing from her, from them, from their unborn child, to build a new life with this other woman. But Corbin had uncovered something even more sinister. "There's something else," he said. "Brennan has been meeting with a business valuation firm, discreetly. They've been reassessing the value of Innovate, and according to my source, the valuation they're preparing is significantly lower than market value. He's undervaluing his own company." Elara frowned. "Why would he do that? It would hurt him financially." "It would," Corbin agreed, "in the long run. But in the short term, if he were, say, anticipating a divorce, a lower official valuation would mean a much smaller settlement for you. He's not just cheating, Mrs. Whittaker. He's preparing for war. He's been planning to leave you for a long time, and he's making sure you walk away with as little as possible." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The lies, the gaslighting, the secret apartment, the stolen money, the undervalued company, it was all part of a single cold and calculated plan. He wasn't just going to leave her, he was going to destroy her financially, leaving her pregnant and with nothing. The charming, loving husband was an illusion. The real Brennan Whittaker was a ruthless predator, and she had been his prey all along. The unraveling was complete. The love was gone, replaced by a chilling clarity. This was no longer about a broken heart. It was about survival. The devastation was a tidal wave, but Elara refused to drown. The shock and grief began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard anger. He had underestimated her. He saw her as a pretty ornament, a gilded cage bird, as he would later call her. He never imagined she had a spine of steel. She would not be a victim. She would fight for herself and for the child growing inside her. The first step was to find the right weapon. Brennan had a team of legal sharksmen who were paid millions to make problems disappear. Elara needed someone who could hunt sharks. Miles Corbin recommended a name, Audrey Finch. Audrey Finch was a legend in family law. She was a petite woman in her late 50s with a razor-sharp mind and a reputation for being completely unflappable. Her office was minimalist and modern, a reflection of her no-nonsense approach. Elara sat across from her, laying out the entire sordid story from the key to Corbin's latest revelations about the company's valuation. She didn't cry. Her voice was steady, fueled by a newfound icy resolve. Audrey listened intently. Her fingers steepled her eyes, never leaving Elara's face. When Elara finished, Audrey nodded slowly. "He's a classic high-level narcissist," Audrey stated, not as a judgment, but as a diagnosis. "Charming on the outside, rotten to the core. They believe they are entitled to everything and will stop at nothing to protect their own interests. The gaslighting, the financial deception, it's all from the same playbook." "Can we win?" Elara asked, the question hanging in the air. A small, confident smile touched Audrey's lips. "Men like Brennan Whittaker always make the same mistake. They are so blinded by their own arrogance that they never see the knockout punch coming. They underestimate the woman they've wronged. Yes, Mrs. Whittaker, we can win, but you have to be prepared. This will be ugly." Audrey's strategy was simple yet brilliant. "For now," she instructed, "you do nothing. You go home. You play the part of the confused, emotional, apologetic wife. Let him think his gaslighting worked. Let him believe he's still in control. The more comfortable he is, the more mistakes he'll make. We need him to get careless. In the meantime, we gather our arsenal. We will build a case so airtight, so damning, that by the time he realizes what's happening, he'll already be in checkmate." Playing the part was the hardest thing Elara had ever done. She went home that night and apologized to Brennan, crying and blaming her pregnancy hormones for her paranoia. Brennan, smug and self-satisfied, comforted her, his words of love and reassurance now sounding like poison in her ears. He believed he had won, that she had been successfully manipulated back into her cage. It was a nauseating performance, but every time she felt her resolve waver, she thought of her baby, and the steel returned to her spine. While Elara played her role, Audrey and Corbin worked in the shadows. They hired forensic accountants to begin secretly untangling Brennan's complex web of shell corporations and hidden accounts. They dug deeper into Nicolette Devereaux, uncovering a history of leveraging wealthy men to advance her ambitions. But Audrey knew financial evidence, while crucial, might not be enough to sway a judge against a man as powerful and charismatic as Brennan. They needed something more. They needed to expose the man, not just his bank accounts. "We have the what," Audrey said during one of their secret meetings. "We know he's funneling money, but we need the why. We need to prove his intent to defraud you. We need to shatter his image as the loving husband who made a mistake. We need his own words." The idea was terrifying, a violation of privacy that went against Elara's every instinct. But Audrey was right. Brennan would paint her as vindictive and greedy. They needed something irrefutable. Corbin suggested a high-tech listening device no bigger than a grain of rice. "It's a huge risk," Corbin warned. "If he finds it, it could blow up in our faces. But if it works—" Elara thought of Brennan's cold, dismissive eyes when he called her hysterical. She thought of him kissing Nicolette. She thought of him systematically planning to leave her and their child with nothing. The fear was still there, but the determination was stronger. "Do it," she said, her voice firm. The opportunity came a week later. Nicolette's gallery was having a small, exclusive reception for a new artist. Brennan, of course, would be there. He told Elara he was attending a tech conference dinner, under the guise of a peace offering. Elara suggested she buy a piece of art from his friend Nicolette to show she was sorry for her accusations and that she supported his business relationships. Brennan was delighted. It was proof that his manipulation had been a complete success. He arranged for a small, elegant sculpture from Nicolette's gallery to be delivered to their penthouse. The night before the reception, with Brennan sleeping soundly, Elara and Corbin worked in the dim light of her walk-in closet. The listening device was incredibly small. Corbin, with the steady hands of a surgeon, expertly embedded it in a tiny crevice at the base of the heavy, abstract sculpture. It was virtually undetectable. The next day, a courier delivered the gift to Nicolette's gallery. Elara included a handwritten note. "Nicolette, thank you for your friendship with my husband. This is a small token of my appreciation for your support. I hope it finds a place of honor in your beautiful gallery. Warmly, Elara." Nicolette, no doubt finding the note quaint and amusing, placed the sculpture directly on her desk. The trap was set. That night, Elara sat in the dark of her own home, a pair of headphones on her laptop connected to the live audio feed. The first few hours were mundane, the low chatter of the reception glasses, clinking talk of art and money. Then, after the guests had left, she heard their voices. Brennan and Nicolette. Alone. "Did you see the note from the little bird?" Nicolette's voice was laced with a smug, mocking tone. "A token of her appreciation. It's almost pathetic." Brennan chuckled. It was a low, cruel sound that made Elara's blood run cold. "She bought the whole act, crying, apologizing, blaming the baby. She's back in her gilded cage, right where she belongs. It's almost too easy." "How much longer do you have to play the doting husband?" Nicolette asked, a hint of impatience in her voice. "This is getting tedious." "Just a few more months," Brennan replied. "The valuation is almost complete. Once the baby is born, I'll file. My lawyers will paint her as an unstable postpartum mess. With the company's value on paper being so low, she'll get a pittance. We'll be free, my love, free of the temporary inconvenience." "And the baby?" Nicolette asked. There was a pause. Then Brennan's voice, stripped of all warmth, all charm, delivered the final devastating blow. "The baby is a complication. Baggage. But baggage can be managed. I'll pay the minimum child support required by law. He, she, whatever it is. It won't be our problem." Elara ripped the headphones from her ears, a strangled sob escaping her lips. It was worse than she had ever imagined. The coldness, the cruelty, the utter lack of humanity. He had called their child baggage, an inconvenience. He wasn't just leaving her, he was erasing them. She saved the recording, her hands shaking so violently she could barely control the mouse. The storm had gathered, the arsenal was complete, and now she was ready to unleash the hurricane. The divorce papers landed on Brennan Whittaker's desk like a declaration of war. He was in his glass-walled office overlooking the city when his personal assistant brought in the envelope. He had been so confident, so sure of his control over the situation that he initially thought it was a mistake. When he read the words "irreconcilable differences petition for dissolution of marriage," his confusion morphed into pure, undiluted rage. He had been played. Elara, his quiet, docile wife, had dared to defy him. He immediately called his lead attorney, Gideon Thorne, a man known for his scorched-earth litigation tactics. "She filed." Brennan spat into the phone. "The little fool actually filed. I want you to bury her. I want you to make her regret the day she was born. I want her to walk away with nothing but the clothes on her back. Is that clear?" Gideon Thorne, a man who reveled in such conflict, assured him it was. The battle lines were drawn. Brennan's legal team, a formidable phalanx of corporate litigators, immediately launched their offensive. They filed a response that was a masterclass in character assassination. They painted Elara as a greedy, unstable gold digger, a woman who had married for money and was now using her pregnancy as a cynical ploy to extort a successful man. They claimed she was emotionally volatile and mentally unwell, and they motioned for a psychological evaluation. The first day of the preliminary hearing was brutal. The courtroom was a sterile, intimidating space, but the tension was thick enough to choke on. Elara, now visibly pregnant, sat beside Audrey Finch, her posture straight, her face a mask of calm she did not feel. Across the aisle, Brennan sat with his team of lawyers. He refused to look at her. Instead, he radiated an aura of wounded arrogance, occasionally shaking his head as if in disbelief at the injustice of it all. Gideon Thorne addressed the judge, his voice smooth and persuasive. He portrayed Brennan as the victim, a loving husband and expectant father who had been blindsided by his wife's sudden and irrational behavior. "Your Honor." Thorne began, his tone dripping with sympathy. "My client, Mr. Whittaker, is a man who has given his wife everything, a life of luxury, of security. He was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a father, and his reward for this devotion, a baseless, vindictive lawsuit filled with wild accusations. We believe the pressures of pregnancy have tragically affected Mrs. Whittaker's judgment, leading her to this unfortunate and destructive path." As Thorne spoke, Brennan shot a look across the aisle at Elara. It wasn't a look of anger or sadness. It was a smirk, a small, confident, cruel twist of his lips that said, "You have no idea who you're dealing with. You are going to lose." Elara felt a surge of anger, but she remembered Audrey's words. Let him be arrogant. Let him underestimate us. She held his gaze for a moment, her expression unreadable, before turning her attention back to the judge. When it was Audrey Finch's turn to speak, her approach was a stark contrast to Thorne's dramatic performance. She was calm, precise, and armed with facts. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and steady, "Mr. Thorne paints a picture of a loving husband. We will present a very different picture, a picture of a man who has engaged in a systematic pattern of deceit, not just against his wife, but against this court." She began by presenting the preliminary findings of their forensic accountant. She laid out the evidence of the Shell Corporation, the $500,000 art investment into Nicolette Devereaux's gallery, and the series of wire transfers from joint accounts that Brennan had disguised as business expenses. "This is not about a single mistake, Your Honor," Audrey stated. "This is about a calculated scheme to defraud my client. Mr. Whittaker has been systematically siphoning marital assets to fund a secret life with his mistress." Brennan's lawyers immediately objected, calling the accusations baseless and slanderous. They claimed the transactions were legitimate art investments for the corporation, a way to diversify assets. "An art investment, Your Honor," Audrey countered, "that just so happened to save his mistress's gallery from bankruptcy. An art investment hidden within a shell company his wife had no knowledge of. The pattern is clear." The judge, a shrewd woman in her 60s named Judge Carmichael, looked intrigued. The confidence in Brennan's posture tightened ever so slightly. He was used to his lawyers steamrolling any opposition. He wasn't used to being so effectively challenged. Audrey wasn't finished. She then raised the issue of Innovate's valuation. "Furthermore, Your Honor, We have reason to believe that Mr. Whittaker is actively attempting to devalue his primary asset, his company Innovate, in anticipation of this divorce. He has commissioned a valuation that we contend is fraudulent and grossly undervalues the company's true worth. Gideon Thorne was on his feet again. Objection. This is pure speculation. Mrs. Whittaker has no expertise in business valuation. That is why, Your Honor, Audrey said, turning back to the judge, we are formally requesting a full independent forensic accounting of all of Mr. Whittaker's personal and business assets to be conducted by a court-appointed neutral expert. Judge Carmichael looked from Audrey to Thorne, then at the mountain of preliminary financial documents Audrey's team had submitted. She leaned forward, her expression serious. Mr. Thorne, your client's financial dealings at first glance appear complex. The judge said, her choice of words deliberate. Given the gravity of the accusations and the significant marital estate in question, I am inclined to grant Ms. Finch's request. I am ordering a full forensic accounting. I want to see everything. A wave of murmurs went through the courtroom. Brennan's smirk finally wavered. This was a complication he hadn't anticipated. An independent audit would be much harder to manipulate. He shot a furious look at Gideon Thorne, who looked momentarily flustered. As the judge adjourned the hearing for the day, Brennan stood up, his movements stiff with anger. He glanced at Elara one last time. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of pure, cold fury. The first battle was over. Elara and Audrey had drawn blood. But Elara knew this was just the beginning. Brennan was a cornered animal now, and that made him more dangerous than ever. The war had just begun. The weeks leading up to the main hearing were a blur of legal maneuvering. The court-appointed forensic accountants descended upon Brennan's empire, and Audrey's team worked tirelessly to prepare for the trial. Brennan, meanwhile, was preparing for the performance of his life. His strategy was no longer just to discredit Elara, but to charm the court to present himself as a flawed but fundamentally decent man who was being unfairly persecuted. When the day came for him to take the stand, he was the very picture of sober contrition. Dressed in a conservative navy suit, he spoke in a calm, earnest tone. He admitted to the affair with Nicolette Devereaux, casting his eyes down as if in shame. It was a terrible mistake, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I was under immense pressure at work, and I strayed. It was the greatest regret of my life. I broke my wife's heart, and I will never forgive myself for that. Gideon Thorne led him through a carefully rehearsed series of questions, allowing him to frame the narrative. The secret apartment. A foolish extravagance, a place to be alone and think, which he allowed a friend Nicolette to use occasionally. The money funneled to her gallery. He portrayed it as a misguided attempt to help a friend's struggling business, a poor decision made in a moment of weakness, not a calculated scheme. Did you ever intend to leave your wife? Thorne asked. Never, Brennan said, looking directly at the judge. I love my wife. I was thrilled about our baby. I was planning to end my association with Ms. Devereaux. I was just waiting for the right time to confess everything to Elara and beg for her forgiveness. But she discovered it first, and things spiraled out of control. He was masterful. He was believable. He seemed less like a villain and more like a man who had made a human, albeit significant, error in judgment. He successfully painted Elara's legal action not as a necessary defense, but as an unforgiving, vengeful overreaction. Elara watched him, her stomach churning. He could lie as easily as he breathed. She could feel the mood in the courtroom shifting. The judge's expression was sympathetic. The gallery filled with reporters was captivated by his performance. When it was Audrey Finch's turn to cross-examine, she was methodical, chipping away at his story with facts and figures from the preliminary accounting reports. She questioned the timing of the art investments, the creation of the shell company, the meetings with the valuation firm. But Brennan was well rehearsed. He had an answer for everything, twisting each point back to his narrative of a one-time mistake, a lapse in judgment not a conspiracy. He parried every one of Audrey's thrusts with a veneer of pained sincerity. When he finally stepped down from the stand, he shot a triumphant look at his lawyer. He had done it. He had neutralized the financial evidence, reframing it as part of his personal failing, for which he was now deeply sorry. As he walked back to his seat, he passed Elara's table. He leaned in just close enough for her to hear his voice, a venomous whisper. "You should have taken the deal, Elara. You're going to regret this." Then he sat down and the smirk returned, wider and more confident than ever. He was certain he had won. Audrey Finch stood up. She knew the financial evidence wasn't enough to completely break through his charismatic defense. She needed to shatter the very foundation of his credibility. She needed to expose the cruelty beneath the charm. "The petitioner calls Nicolette Devereaux to the stand," Audrey announced. A ripple of anticipation went through the courtroom. Brennan's confident expression didn't change. He had prepped Nicolette for hours. She knew her lines. She would be his star witness, confirming his version of events. Nicolette Devereaux walked to the stand with the poise of a runway model. She was dressed in a chic, understated black dress, her fiery hair tied back in an elegant knot. She was the picture of sophistication and confidence. Gideon Thorne began with a gentle, friendly examination. "Ms. Devereaux, could you please describe your relationship with Mr. Whittaker?" "Brennan and I became close friends," she said, her voice smooth and polished. "I was going through a difficult time personally and financially, and he was a great source of support. I admit our friendship crossed a line. It was a mistake, one we both regretted." "And the money Mr. Whittaker invested in your gallery?" Thorne asked. "Was that part of a scheme to defraud his wife?" "Of course not," Nicolette said, looking almost offended by the suggestion. "Brennan is a savvy investor. He saw potential in my gallery and the artists I represent. It was a business decision. The fact that we were also friends was separate." "So, to be clear," Thorne concluded, "you were not conspiring with him to hide assets from his wife." "No, that's a ridiculous and hurtful accusation." Nicolette's performance was flawless. She corroborated Brennan's story at every turn. She was defiant, poised, and utterly believable. She framed their affair as a genuine, if regrettable, connection and completely dismissed the idea of any financial conspiracy. Brennan leaned back in his chair, the smirk now a full-blown triumphant grin. He folded his arms, looking from his mistress on the stand to his wife. The message was clear. Checkmate. He believed the trial was over. He had successfully controlled the narrative. He had two convincing witnesses to his version of events, while Elara had only a pile of financial documents that he had successfully explained away. The courtroom was silent, hanging on every word. Everyone believed he had won. As Gideon Thorne sat down, a wave of smug satisfaction settled over Brennan's side of the courtroom. The narrative was sealed. It was the story of a flawed but repentant husband and an unfortunate affair twisted into a malicious lawsuit by a vindictive wife. Brennan looked at Elara, his eyes glittering with triumph. He was untouchable. Then Audrey Finch stood up. She approached the podium for her cross-examination of Nicolette, her movements calm and deliberate. The air in the courtroom grew still with anticipation. "Ms. Devereaux," Audrey began, her voice even and disarmingly pleasant. "You've painted a very clear picture for us. A picture of a friendship that tragically crossed a line. A picture of regret." Nicolette sat up straighter, her chin high. "That's correct. You speak of your connection with Mr. Whittaker, your shared mistake." Audrey continued, her eyes locked on Nicolette's. "You've told us what your relationship looked like. Now let's hear what it sounded like, shall we?" A flicker of confusion crossed Nicolette's face. Brennan leaned forward slightly, his grin tightening. Gideon Thorne rose halfway out of his seat, a sense of unease dawning on him. "Objection, Your Honor. Vague and speculative." "I'm happy to be more specific, Your Honor," Audrey said, not waiting for the judge's ruling. She turned to the paralegal at her table and gave a single sharp nod. "I would like to play for the court a recording, evidence item 112B." "Objection," Thorne shouted, now fully on his feet. "Improper foundation. We have no knowledge of this recording. It's a conversation between the witness and Mr. Whittaker." "Your Honor," Audrey said calmly, "recorded in Ms. Devereaux's art gallery. I believe it is highly relevant to the witness's testimony regarding the nature of her relationship with Mr. Whittaker and their shared regret." Judge Carmichael looked at Audrey, then at the frantic objections from Brennan's counsel. "I'll allow it," the judge said, her curiosity piqued. "Proceed, Ms. Finch." Before Thorne could object further, the paralegal pressed a key on her laptop. A digital file was projected onto the screen for the court to see, audio file and gallery, and then a voice filled the silent courtroom. It was Nicolette's voice, dripping with mockery. "Did you see the note from the little bird, a token of her appreciation? It's almost pathetic." A collective gasp went through the gallery. Nicolette Devereaux froze on the stand, her face instantly draining of all color. Her polished composure shattered like glass. Then came Brennan's voice, a low, cruel chuckle that was utterly devoid of the warmth and sincerity he had projected on the stand just minutes before. "She bought the whole act, crying, apologizing, blaming the baby. She's back in her gilded cage right where she belongs. It's almost too easy." Brennan's smirk vanished as if it had been wiped from his face. His jaw went slack. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He stared at the speakers as if they were spitting venom directly at him. The audio continued, relentless and damning. Nicolette's voice. "How much longer do you have to play the doting husband? This is getting tedious." Brennan's voice. "Just a few more months. The valuation is almost complete. Once the baby is born, I'll file. My lawyers will paint her as an unstable postpartum mess. With the company's value on paper being so low, she'll get a pittance. We'll be free, my love. Free of the temporary inconvenience." The phrase, temporary inconvenience, hung in the dead air of the courtroom. It was a gut punch. Elara felt a tremor run through her, but she did not look away from Brennan. She watched as his carefully constructed world imploded in real time. But the worst was yet to come. Nicolette's voice, cold and dismissive. "And the baby?" A short pause in the recording made the entire courtroom hold its breath. Then came Brennan's voice, stripped of all humanity, a voice of pure reptilian calculation. "The baby is a complication. Baggage. But baggage can be managed. I'll pay the minimum child support required by law. He, she, whatever it is. It won't be our problem." Silence. A profound, ringing silence fell over the courtroom. The recording ended. On the witness stand, Nicolette Devereaux crumbled. She put her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Her credibility, her poise, her entire testimony incinerated. But every eye in the room was on Brennan Whittaker, the master of the universe, the charming CEO, the man who had smirked in the face of his pregnant wife. His face was a canvas of horror and disbelief. The smirk was a distant memory replaced by the slack-jawed terror of a man who had just been publicly and irrevocably executed by his own words. He looked at his lawyer, at the judge, and finally his eyes met Elara's. Elara didn't look triumphant. She didn't look vengeful. Her expression was one of quiet, steely resolve. Her hand rested protectively on her pregnant belly. In her eyes, he saw not hatred, but something far worse, pity. And in that moment, Brennan Whittaker, the man who thought he had everything, realized he had truly, finally lost it all. The hidden audio had not just changed the case. It had revealed the truth, a truth so ugly and so cruel that no amount of money or power could ever bury it again. The aftermath of the audio recording was swift and brutal. It was as if a bomb had detonated in the center of the courtroom, and the fallout incinerated every lie Brennan had so carefully constructed. The atmosphere shifted from a contentious legal dispute to a public condemnation. Judge Carmichael's expression was thunderous. Her sympathy for the flawed husband had evaporated, replaced by a cold fury. She looked at Brennan, who was still frozen in his chair, and then at Nicolette, who was weeping on the stand with utter contempt. "Ms. Devereaux, you may step down," the judge said, her voice sharp as ice. She then turned her steely gaze on Gideon Thorne. "Mr. Thorne, given this revelation, I suggest you have a conversation with your client about the penalties for perjury and attempting to perpetrate a fraud upon this court." Gideon Thorne, for the first time in his storied career, was speechless. His face was ashen. He knew the case was not just lost, it was annihilated. The audio was the silver bullet that had killed their entire defense. The trial was effectively over. The forensic accountant's final report, which was submitted the following day, was now viewed through the damning lens of Brennan's own recorded words. His intent to defraud was no longer an accusation. It was a confessed strategy. Every complex financial transaction, every undervalued asset was now irrefutable proof of his scheme. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. The settlement was an overwhelming and complete victory for Elara. Judge Carmichael, in her final ruling, did not mince words. She excoriated Brennan for his callous cruelty and his brazen attempt to manipulate the justice system. Elara was awarded the penthouse apartment free and clear. She was awarded 60% of the true value of their marital assets based on the independent accountant's much higher and more accurate valuation of Innovate. The court pierced the corporate veils of his shell companies, and the money he had funneled to Nicolette was returned to the marital estate before being divided. She was also awarded substantial alimony and a child support order that was based not on Brennan's lies, but on his actual immense wealth. Brennan's reckoning didn't end in family court. The judge, citing clear evidence of perjury and fraud, referred the case to the district attorney's office. He was now facing a criminal investigation that threatened not just his fortune, but his freedom. His reputation was in tatters. The board of Innovate forced his resignation. The story was everywhere, the handsome tech mogul laid low by his own vile words. Nicolette Devereaux's world collapsed as well. The scandal destroyed her gallery. Her artists left, her investors pulled out, and the business built on a lie crumbled into bankruptcy. She disappeared from the public eye, a social pariah. Months passed. The city moved on to the next scandal, the next headline. For Elara, the quiet was a balm. The legal battles faded into the background, replaced by the rhythms of new life. One sunny afternoon in early summer, Elara was in a park, gently pushing a stroller. In it, sleeping peacefully, was her son, a beautiful baby boy named Ethan. She had sold the cavernous penthouse and moved into a lovely light-filled house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. Her life was no longer about opulence or status. It was about peace, security, and the overwhelming love she felt for her child. She sat on a bench watching Ethan's tiny chest rise and fall. She took out her phone and saw a news alert. It was a picture of Brennan looking haggard and defeated, leaving a courthouse with his lawyers. He had just accepted a plea deal in his fraud case to avoid prison time, agreeing to pay millions in fines and serve a lengthy probation. For a moment she watched the video, the ghost of the man she once loved, now a stranger defined by his public disgrace. There was no triumph, no flicker of satisfaction. There was only a quiet sense of closure. She switched off the phone, slid it into her bag, and looked down at her son. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. He was her true treasure, the future she had fought for. The gilded cage was a distant memory. She was free. She had faced the storm and walked out the other side, not unscathed but stronger. She had found a new, more authentic life, a life built not on wealth or illusion, but on the unshakable foundation of her own resilience and a mother's love. And that was a victory greater than any courtroom could ever grant. That was the incredible story of Elara Whittaker. A story that proves that strength isn't about the money you have or the power you wield, but about the courage you find when you have nothing left to lose. Elara's fight for justice for herself and for her child is a powerful reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of coming to light. And sometimes, the quietest voice can create the loudest roar. What did you think of Brennan's ultimate downfall? Were you shocked by the cruelty in that hidden audio? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story as compelling as I did, please give this video a like, share it with someone who loves a story of justice being served, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more true-life dramas. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful stories to you. Thanks for listening.